media mix modeling gets out of the path world. And what it's doing is it is saying, from a macro perspective, when I spend more in a channel, is there a statistical relationship to the success events that I care about?
In our upcoming mini-series, we're focused on MMM, or marketing mix modeling, versus attribution. Are they mortal enemies, best friends who love working together, or somewhere in between? This series asks 3 experts for their thoughts. Welcome back to another episode of Attribution Nation podcast. I'm your host, Drew Smith, CEO and founder of Attribution, a consulting firm that specializes in marketing attribution and marketing data. And I'm joined today by Ryan Hobson, president and co-founder of Align BI. And we're going to get into Ryan's background as we dive into the topics. So Ryan, we'll give you a chance to talk about all of your history and how you got to where you are and all the good stuff about Align BI. And so what I really want to get started with, though, is let's talk a little bit about your background and how you got into this space. So you worked at Adobe for, give or take, about a decade. At the time, you were working at Adobe, which obviously now has Marketo Measure, and is in the marketing attribution space. And so tell me a little bit about your understanding of B2B marketing analytics tools and how that's evolved over time through the lens of your time and experience at Adobe.
Yeah, I landed there right after graduate school. I was on the B2B side doing analytics from the beginning. When I started, we were doing this modified first source where we would look back, and it wasn't a true first source because, for Adobe, true first source would have been like, for a lot of these people, 5 years ago. So it was kind of this modified period of gap, first thing after this gap that kicked off this string of events. So we were mostly just interested in did marketing kick off a bunch of interactions that led to an opportunity being created. So we just were doing first source, and we just cared about kind of sourcing things to the sales team. So in my time there, moved from that to a multi-touch model. From multi-touch models, we moved into algorithmic attribution models where we were assigning credit based on how they lifted the likelihood of success. Ultimately, I ended up taking on a media mix model, which we'll get into a little bit later today. But so over that 9 years, kind of spanned the gambit of measurement approaches. And so got experience with all of them. These conversations are like therapy for me because, some of them are really painful and some of them were insightful. And so it's fun to share the war stories and the pain, of the measurement. But did that for the 9 years there and had a, great run and learned a ton. So excited to share, those learnings today, but that's kind of how I went through it.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like when you were at Adobe was going through a little bit of a maturation process themselves in starting with this modified first touch and then graduating to MTA and then doing, some even more advanced things. So it sounds like for Adobe, they were kind of taking a step-by-step approach of, hey, we're going to start with this, and then we're gonna build up from there. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. As we got more sophisticated, as marketing spend got bigger, as interaction accounts grew, it was okay, now let's grow a little bit. So absolutely grew along the way. I was there when they purchased Marketo, and so as we started to try Visible. Before that, we actually were doing a lot of our logic in a data warehouse. So we'd bring all of our CRM data out into a data warehouse and built a lot of the attribution logic in that data warehouse. But then, as you pointed out, we purchased Marketo and Visible. And so then started looking at some of that software as well.
Okay, cool. I think that's important for listeners to just think through is, we always talk about attribution in terms of, we want to get to multi-touch attribution. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but, it's not right for everybody. Not everybody should be doing multi-touch. So it's interesting to even hear a behemoth in the industry like Adobe that starts small and works their way up with like step by step by step by step. You don't go from we're doing source to we're doing this super complex thing. There's steps on that journey that you have to take. Yeah.
Do what you can. Absolutely. Agree. And there's a lot of learnings along the way. So, that growth is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you started Align BI, and I'm making some assumptions here, but I'm guessing that you uncovered some gaps that you saw during your time at Adobe and said, I can build something to fill those gaps. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I should highlight Align BI was actually around before I joined. I actually used them when I was at Adobe for the data warehouse. So when I saw these gaps, which I'll talk about in a second, I went to Align BI and said, hey, I think there's a way to build some stuff specifically for B2B. So I joined them and said, hey, can I build this with you guys? And so really what I found at Align BI is this. They were a data consulting company, and now we're building the SaaS offering in media mix modeling. So that's the side of it. But they've been around for a little bit doing kind of data warehouse consulting work. Really good. So yeah, the gap I found was as I went on this measurement journey, I went from a first touch model to a multi-touch model to an algorithmic model. Algorithmic, what I mean by that is we would feed it into a data science model, all the paths, and then we would look at on the path if a touch increased the likelihood of a success event, and then we would assign credit based on how it lifted the likelihood. So it was a data science approach, but still path-based. And as I went through that process, what I found was I was getting these descriptive statistics. How much credit was search getting? And it was varying across the models, but I was still sort of left to triangulate. Okay, search is getting 30% in one model, 35% in another model, right? What I still had to figure out, well, is that good or bad? Like, do I need to do more or less search? So I eventually landed on our media mix model. Our B2C team had been using it for a long time. It's been in B2C for decades. They had been trying to get it to work on our B2B side, but they were B2C marketers, and so they didn't quite have the same kind of B2B background. So I took that on, and that was one gap that was suddenly solved for me. Was now I had a model, and I think we'll get into how these work a little bit in a second, but now I have a model that's actually recommending a budget mix. So not just a descriptive 35% credit, but it's you should increase search by 7%, right? So now that was a big gap that I had never been able to fill as I went on the previous measurement journey. But then the gap for leaving Adobe was we were the only users of this media mix model software from a B2B perspective. All the rest of the customers were B2C. And I sort of found that most media mix modeling solutions were B2C. It's been which makes sense. It's been there for a long time. So I just thought I saw a way to build these specifically for B2B. And I thought, well, maybe I can go build that, that specifically for B2B portion. So yeah, left Adobe. I knew Align BI had the back data movement and data warehousing skills I didn't have. So went to them and said, hey, can we build this together? And so we've set on the journey now to build B2B specific media mix modeling.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about media mix modeling and its applications for B2B organizations. I think it's interesting to point out. Now, your education background is in data science, right?
It's my last semester of undergrad. I'd been delaying my stats class. I didn't love math, actually. Like my math background, it's like you wouldn't think based on my background I'd be in math today. Like middle school and high school were a disaster for me on math. So I'm like delaying stats class. I take it my last semester of college, and it was like this light. Like I loved math suddenly. Maybe it's that I found this really cool application for math. Like it's cool to understand the statistical difference between some numbers and what that might mean for some decision making. So it was too late to like restart undergrad at that point. So I probably would have if I had only been 2 years in. I loved it that much. So then I went to graduate school. I got my MBA. I sought out as many statistics classes as I could, but still was probably only like 3 or 4, that I was able to find during my MBA program. So then I landed at Adobe, and Adobe had this great education benefit where they would give a certain amount of money toward, education efforts. So I used that, and I went and got another master's degree in data science through the University of Wisconsin. Sometimes I refer to it as a fake master's degree because it was online, but it was through, a legit school, and took me about 3 years of like nighttime and morning to get through it, but really loved it. And I felt like I just needed to get deep into it after I'd had that itch for so long. And so, yeah, now I do have that background. I, definitely wouldn't say I'm any PhD in it, but I have a lot of practical experience, especially in the marketing space on it now.
Online degrees count. Give yourself credit for that. That counts. Right, absolutely. Thanks. Absolutely. Now I bring that up because typically a lot of marketers are not, and again, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it every time I mention this. This is not a knock on marketers in any way, shape, or form, but a lot of marketers don't like math. They just don't. And so this is complicated stuff, and marketers, if they want to get this right and be able to use data in this way, they don't need to go get an MBA in data science, but they've got to get more comfortable with math and statistics and learn some basics.
Yes, totally agree. Because they don't need to go build this, right? Like, they're not going to go build attribution models either. They just understand how they work, and so they can talk to why something's getting credit. So yeah, all they need to understand is like how regression models work. We'll get into how these work, but it's basically regression modeling and how spends explain our KPIs in our funnel, from a statistical perspective. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit deeper. But yeah, so they don't need to worry about building these. Their analysts can help. There's software and experts that will do the build. As long as they just understand how it works.
Yeah, and then obviously how to use the output, right? How to read and interpret the output, super important as well. So let's talk a little bit about these things. Let's talk about some definitions, define some concepts, and I want to focus on how you, Ryan, define these things, not necessarily how the market does, but how you define these. So let's start with attribution. What is attribution, and why does multi-touch attribution exist at all?
So yeah, to me, when I say attribution, I think path-based credit models. And they exist because when B2B kind of first started, we were giving leads to our sales teams, and we needed to know what created that lead. And so we said, hey, what did they do when they filled out this form? And we sent them over to our sales team. And so we started to look at, what's the thing they did right before the form, or what's the first thing they did that got them to the form. So when I think of attribution, I'm thinking path-based. And I think what they've become is a way to both defend marketing's impact, show marketing's impact. We've tried to use attribution, in my opinion, to make decisions. I think that's where it starts to get a little bit hard, is that forward-looking decision-making, like what do I do about it? But yeah, when I think of attribution, I think of path-based credit to help show how marketing is driving and impacting pipeline.
Okay.
Is that flow? Are you similar? Or is that, are we, you probably have a better definition than I do of attribution, but
I'm never going to say better. It's slightly different, but yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think that attribution is a way to essentially create a narrative of what are all the things that happened on the journey to creating an opportunity and winning a deal. A lot of times I liken it to turning a deal or an opportunity into a novel. And each chapter in the novel is one of your touch points, right? And the person that had the touch point is a character in the story. So it's telling that story is really how I tend to define attribution. But it's what you're saying is basically the same thing, just choosing different words to
yeah. No, I like that. That's good. Yeah. No, I like that approach too. And
now, flip side of that, how do you define MMM?
Yeah. So media mix modeling gets out of the path world. And what it's doing is it is saying, from a macro perspective, when I spend more in a channel, is there a statistical relationship to the success events that I care about? So that might be buying groups. I don't think a lot of people are in buying groups yet, but so it's like MQLs. It's pipeline, which is where I prefer to build these to, since that's where we start to speak the same language as sales, even to closed won. So it's, hey, I increased my spend last month in Google search. Did I see a statistical relationship to pipeline being created? So what you're looking at is you're looking at like a couple years of history. You're looking at all the variation in your channel spends, and then you're looking at the variation in your success events, and you're looking at how strongly related those marketing spends are to our success events. So there's no path assignment, there's no cookies, you don't need forms, you don't even need individuals. It is just macro. Where am I spending my money? How related is that to my success events? And then once that model's built, where it became eye-opening for me was, now that I understand the relationship between my spends and my success events, the model can then be ran through an optimizer that will say, hey, if you're trying to hit X amount of dollars, you need to spend Y, and this is how you should spend it. You should increase search by 5%. You should decrease display. You should drop LinkedIn. There's no relationship between your LinkedIn, and I'm not saying everybody's is different, but so just picking some random channels there. But drop channel B because there's zero relationship. You've been increasing channel B like this, and your pipeline's been going like this. There's no relationship between them. So it's that macro level kind of strategy. And the reason I say it was eye-opening and informative and like really changed my approach is, as I took on the media mix model at Adobe, suddenly I'm sitting down with my CMO, who never cared previously about how much credit a channel got. What she cared about is, how much does she need to spend and where is she going to spend it? So it just changed the level that I was speaking at. Instead of going to her telling her search is getting 30% credit, I'm going to her and saying, you need to spend 10% more in this channel, 5% less. And so when I say media mix models, it is basically a macro trend approach, regression model approach to identifying the relationship between marketing and sales. Doesn't require a form. You don't have to connect leads to opportunities. You're just looking, I did this. Did my KPIs do that?
Got it. Okay. Now, it sounds to me like one of the biggest differentiators that you're talking about between MMM and attribution is specifically the predictive nature of MMM and how it can tell you increase spend on this channel by 5% and decrease spend on this channel by 3% to optimize your channel mix. Is that one of the biggest, do you agree that that's one of the biggest differentiators? And are there any other key differentiators that you would want to call out there?
Yeah, I'd say that's absolutely one of the biggest differentiators. We did take, like I said, I did that algorithmic attribution model for a little bit, and it did tell me which channels were lifting the likelihood. And so I was able to triangulate a little bit better. Like, okay, hey, search in my algorithmic model is showing that it lifts the likelihood. So I should probably go spend some more there, but I didn't know exactly how much more to spend. So it is a differentiator in that it will give a dollar recommendation. I would say the other differentiator is that fact that we're not connecting leads to opportunities. So these are really powerful, especially for those businesses that have a hard time either making the connection between their marketing and their success events, or, as cookies are getting more difficult, as building that path gets a little bit more difficult, privacy becomes more important. We don't need to know that stuff. I just need first party data. I just need to know I did more of this. Did I see more of my success event? So I say the other big differentiator, well, and I'll do one more beyond that, is that we're at the macro. We don't need to be down and connecting stuff. So it makes it actually a little bit easier sometimes if you have the volume of data, that you need. The third biggest differentiator, I'd say, is it allows us to measure all marketing channels, not just the demand gen gated stuff. So I can bring in brand spend. As I've increased my brand spend, and that, like, even like we're doing here, podcasts are, as I've increased my podcast listeners, have I seen a relationship to my pipeline? It allows us to bring in marketing activities that don't drive to a form. And they then become part of my overall budget strategy. I think that's another reason my CMO was suddenly excited to meet with me, is because now I'm talking about her brand budget, which she loved, right? She loved spending in brand, but before it was like measure demand. And I have this money I'm spending in brand that we do like brand tracker, so we're like still kind of measuring it, but it's like, is my brand tracker going up? But it's not directly tied to pipeline. So it kind of had this like, I'll go spend over here sort of free pass, but I'm going to measure demand. Now I can have all of it together. I'm looking at the entire budget and making decisions between brand and demand now, and able to tweak those. So those are probably three of my favorite. There's a few more, but I think those are probably the things I like the most.
Yeah. So you mentioned brand and tracking brand with attribution and how that's a big challenge. I think that one of the things that we recommend for orgs that have attribution, that don't have MMM, that still need to be able to track brand, is using a kind of like doing like a lift analysis methodology. Because one of the things I love about attribution is like, even though I can't track brand to an opportunity specifically, what I can do is I can look at, okay, we spent X amount of money on a brand campaign, and then I can correlate that to an increase in the touch points that are tracked by my attribution platform, specifically in the direct channel and the organic search channel, because that's where your brand efforts are really going to be most visible, is in direct and organic search. So if I'm increasing my brand advertising and I'm not seeing an increase in my direct and organic search touch points, well, that means that it's not really having an impact yet. It could be it could be a time lag, but we're not seeing an increase. So you have to do like with attribution data, you don't have a direct touch point tied to brand, but there are strategies. And I would even say that like doing that lift analysis is adjacent to MMM.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You're stepping in because you just, using the word correlate, right? So as you've increased your brand, you're just looking at a higher KPI. Am I seeing this other KPI, my organic, as I've increased brand, is organic coming up? So yeah, you're stepping into media mix modeling there for sure, which is great. Yeah, it's like a, intro way, a start, first step into it, which is perfect. So yeah, you can do that. You can do the brand tracker. Is my brand recall increase? I did this brand campaign, has recall, increased. You have to engage firms to help you do that and stuff. But you're right. There's other ways to do that brand as well.
Yeah, and I think this is where and you and I have talked about this previously, where I have this hypothesis that marketing attribution and the data created by marketing attribution can be really, really useful to a media mix model, because you do have some direct touch points tied to direct traffic and organic search traffic that gives you a more early indicator. Whereas opportunities and pipeline would be a lagging indicator, you do still have an earlier indicator, and you can still directly relate those to opportunities as well. So I think that my pet hypothesis that you and I have talked about is that attribution and MMM are not enemies. They actually can work really, really close together and really well together.
Yeah, there's quite a few things that MMM can't do. I don't know if, and MMM can't get down to the campaign. So I can optimize some macro channels, but at the campaign level, there's just too many of them, and the data behind a lot of them is too small. So yeah, I'll use attribution for my campaigns. If I don't have 2 years of data, if I'm a startup, which I currently am, and I haven't spent tons of money, and MMM is not going to work for me. So, and as you grow, you layer in the MMM, but yeah, you'll still use attribution for that campaign level, the high level, like you're talking about, the earlier indicators, and you still got to get leads to your sales team. So you still got to gate at some point, And you're still going to want to know, with those paths in the story like you highlighted. So I would say it's one of several tools. It's not, MMMs aren't the only tool by any means.
If you were consulting a company, like a startup, you're talking to a B2B SaaS company, they're early stage, right now they're just doing, first touch. How would you instruct them to think about when is the right time to start using attribution and when is the right time to start looking at MMM?
Yep. So attribution first, for sure. You're not spending tons in marketing. You don't have these long touch paths. It's likely that they've only interacted with you 1 or 2 times before they've either asked for a demo or, you've engaged them. So there's not a lot to look at. You haven't spent tons. So you probably just do first source for a while, get away with it. Adobe, which, purchased Omniture, was doing first source and they were big. They got, was that purchase? $1 billion, I think. So yeah, you can do first source for a while. I would say you want to move into media mix modeling probably once you're spending across 4, 5 marketing channels, because now you're starting to make these like budget decisions. And I would say you've probably been doing it for a couple years. I think we've done it as short as 18 months of data that we've looked back across. 18 months to 2 years of data. You're probably spending, some people think you have to be spending millions. You don't. We've done this with a customer that had only been spending about $300K a year. So you don't have to wait to be spending millions, but they were spending that $300K across like 8 or 9 different channels. So they were like kind of across a lot of things. They were wanting to understand what had the strongest relationship, but they had been doing it for a couple of years. So a couple of years, at least $500,000 in spend across quite a few channels. And at that point, now you're saying, okay, I need to optimize. Where should I make changes? That's where I think these media mix models start to become important.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. So let's talk a little bit about, you get to see a lot of customer data. What do you think B2B marketing teams are getting wrong in terms of what they're investing in? Like, where do you see organizations are wasting their investment?
Yeah. I think we are over, as I'm going to say we, because I was B2B marketing at Adobe and I'm B2B marketing now. It is so easy to get caught up in the channels that drive to a form that show up in our tracking, because we need to justify marketing's impact. And so I think that what we do is we end up overspending in those form-based channels that drive to a form. Instead of like we're here, like a podcast or PR, when a company has PR, that's really hard to put into an attribution model because it's articles. So it's like my PR agency has increased my articles. I do not know how those articles are translating to pipeline. When we throw them into media mix model, almost every time PR has a really strong relationship to pipeline, but it's really hard to measure that and put it in there. And so we aren't like confident going out and doing that. So it's all of those brand, maybe the other third one there is brand spend. We can find a relationship to short-term pipe. A lot of times people think I spend on brand to increase pipeline in 2 years, but there is a relationship between brand spend and pipe creation next month. And we find that it's not usually as strong a relationship as it is with the traditional demand gen channels. Those have a strong relationship, but that demand or that brand effort will have a relationship. So I think it's those non-gated channels like we're doing now, like with the podcast, are really effective. We're just sometimes a little scared to spend time on them because they're hard to connect. So when we do bring them in, we see a relationship, and a lot of times the model says do more of them. And so I think the media mix models make that a little bit easier to go do.
Yeah, PR is, again, just like brand, it is incredibly difficult to track in attribution. We always recommend a similar lift analysis as we do to, brand investments, that if you're running a PR campaign, let's do that lift analysis after that campaign runs. So now that's where, again, this is where attribution and MMM really are vastly different from one another, but also still can play well together. Is if you're doing lift analysis on a PR campaign, you could see an increase to your direct and organic search touch points, which is, again, where PR is mostly going to show up. And it has nothing to do with PR. It actually has something to do with a brand campaign that's also going on the side. Attribution won't help you distinguish between, well, was it the brand campaign or was it the PR campaign that ran simultaneously? Whereas media mix modeling has controls and mathematical models that can say, was this due to the PR or was this more due to the brand?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And it finds those because as long as you're not always spending together, like if PR always goes up with brand, the model's gonna have a hard time. But yeah, because most often they aren't moving together, the model is able to identify the difference between them and then explain how much is, show how much is explained by each. So it allows you to break those out for sure.
Yeah. So just to in case our listeners are looking for a little bit of a practical example of what Ryan's talking about here. So let's say, for example, our brand spend is flat. Let's just say we spend $50K a month on brand.
Every month.
It's flat.
Yeah.
And then suddenly in March, you have a $20,000 PR campaign that happens. That's going to be easy to really distinguish that if there is a lift after that PR campaign in direct and organic search traffic, that we can, ascribe that list. I was checking my internal thesaurus for something other than attribute. We can ascribe that lift to the PR campaign because brand was flat. So brand didn't have the impact. Now, if during that month of March where we ran the PR campaign that cost us 10 grand, if our brand investment went down by 10 grand to pay for that PR campaign and we see a lift, well, that's obviously the PR campaign has to be responsible for that. But now if the same thing happens and in March we also have a lift in brand spend by 10K, now it's going to be really difficult.
And a harder time.
Brand and PR went up at the same time. So now, well, which one was it? We increased.
And so then you hope that you have 2 years of history where they don't always move together. And then the model will identify the differences. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, what else do you, so when marketers are measuring these investments, what do you think marketers get wrong about just the measurement particularly?
I think you mean in that question, you're asking, like, are we measuring certain channels, giving too much credit to certain channels or more from an approach perspective?
Could be that. I mean, it could be approach perspective. It could be we're looking at things too soon. And we may not have enough time to see if that investment, paid off or not.
I would say the thing that we do wrong, the biggest wrong, the one that drives me the craziest is influence reporting. Because I remember at Adobe, we were influencing like billions. Like I remember we had a marketer who would come in and ran a certain division of our marketing and she just influenced the whole world, and that doesn't drive confidence when you come in and you're like, I influenced 100% of the pipeline. So, so what I think, whether you're using the path-based attribution or so first source, or if you're using a multi-touch or you're using media mix modeling, I think what's important is looking, and as you've described it a little bit, is looking at like lift where we can. So even if you're using first source, as I've done first source attribution, as I've spent more there, have I seen a lift? That can come from A/B testing, can come from media mix models, and come from eyeballing a little bit, right? But I just think this like idea of like, I touched that opportunity, therefore I influenced it, really starts to kill our credibility with finance and sales, because they know that like we're touching a lot of these deals. Not every touch is important. But if I come in and I'm telling you that I influenced that deal and then we reveal the story, right, the path, and we look and it was like a few emails, it's tough for them to like believe the credit that we're trying to take. So I think influence is not a good place to go. Even, in path-based, there's other ways to do it. I always had a hard time with influence. And that's just my personal, maybe others have had found better ways, or maybe you even have ways that you like to use influence. That one's always been like the measurement approach that I struggled with, because I just wasn't confident that a touch really did anything.
Yeah, I mean, we always, when we do influence reporting with clients, one of the things that we always do is we always tell them flat out, like, the data might tell you that this one email click was worth $100,000, but let's all be realistic here. We know that it probably wasn't. And so we typically will say, like, number one, don't use the word cause ever, because attribution does not get into causality in any way, shape, or form. Never.
Yeah.
But you can determine that, hey, email tends to be a channel that is highly correlated with wins. If we are communicating with people via email, we win more deals. Cool.
And the way I did that, I remember at Adobe, is we would say 4 opportunities that had email on their path. What was their, what is their close rate or creation rate? And for those that did, and you could kind of, that's, you can get into that lift a little bit, so you're still looking at the touches, and maybe it's a volume. Maybe for those that had more than X amount, it closed at this rate or created at this rate. And so, you can absolutely, I like that like you're describing of, looking at those differences, not calling it causation, but looking at when it is there, do we see a difference?
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing too that we talk to organizations about a lot is, like, so on this one opportunity, sure, this one email may have gotten $100,000 worth of value or credit on this one opportunity, but there's 10 opportunities after that where an email got $3 worth of credit. So when you look at it in the micro, you look at it as, well, there's no way this email should get $100,000 worth of value. But then when you zoom out and you look at the email channel holistically across a large set of data, that smooths out. Those outliers smooth out in the data so that we can actually start to trust that, well, email actually does get credit for this amount. Yeah, it got credit for $100,000 on this one, but over here, it literally got credit for 7 cents. So, like, that kind of starts to even out.
And when I say influence too, what I even mean more is, like, instead of assigning $1 back to it, it's just like you're just reporting all these opportunities, and you're just saying we influenced all these opportunities. Is where I struggle with influence. So like you're saying, is at the channel, how much did it get credit? I think of that a little bit different than I think just saying we influenced this opportunity, and you look at it and it's like, did you actually increase the likelihood that it was going to close, or did we just touch it a few times, like not very consequentially? So but that's what when I say influence, I mean like just taking full credit for an opportunity that we touched.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now, this does get into something that you said before, where you've talked about how sales and finance has to believe marketing's contribution to pipeline is accurate and actionable, and that you have to use statistics to do this. I wholeheartedly agree that credibility is the most important thing for marketers when we're talking about attribution, because if the data isn't believable, you're just going to get laughed out of the room. So, but marketers aren't statisticians. We've aligned on that. So how can they set themselves up for success when they're having a conversation with somebody in finance or sales that might have a little bit of a leg up on them from a statistics and math skill set standpoint?
Yeah. I think it goes back a little bit to what we were saying earlier. They don't need to build it, just like they didn't build their path-based attribution. They just need to be able to describe it. And I think most marketers have probably taken a stats class, maybe in college. Maybe they really get away with it, but I think most have. I think, it's kind of like I had to, right? I was avoiding it. I had to take it. There's a few concepts we remember. We understand, I think, the basics of regression. It's, does something move with the success, right? Does ice cream sales move with heat, right? So we get the basics of regression modeling. We understand the idea of maybe how strong is a model. So how much does pipeline, how much is it explained by my marketing? So if we can talk to it at that level, and not all marketers have to. Some marketers are building creative, right? Some marketers are in messaging, right? So I think it's your operation, your marketing ops people. It's some of the marketing leaders just need to understand, okay, instead of a path now, I can do this statistics approach. And maybe they're just using path still. And I think your question is generally not just media mix modeling, but how do we sit down with finance? So whether you're using attribution, whether you're using media mix modeling, where I think that this becomes like a level playing field with finance is on the lift discussion. It's, hey, we've used path-based, we've used media mix modeling to identify that when we spend in marketing, we're seeing this lift. And so you can arrive at that however you want to arrive at that. But once they kind of identify that we're not just, going back to influence, we're not just taking credit for every deal. We're saying marketing spend is impact, is lifting pipeline by this amount. If you can get them to agree to the math that you're using to get there, then they will feel confident that in giving you another $1 million, you're going to return X. So I saw this play out like with a customer we had recently. It was so fun. We engaged finance to get all the spend data. They kind of had a basic understanding of what we were trying to do, but not full understanding. We brought in all the spend. We brought in all the success events. Then we built the model and we went back and we showed them like, look, as we toggle across different budget levels, this is the model telling you to increase or decrease these different spends. And now suddenly, because we're at that budget level and we've used some math that he trusts, he immediately became a partner with the marketer. And the two of them, marketer and like finance partner, now we went together to the larger finance team to discuss the plan. Like, this is the spend plan. Look, if we spend this, because of the math we're using, we feel confident that we'll drive this. And this is the way we plan to spend it. So I think it's having them believe whatever math you're using from a lift perspective. And then I hinted, but I'll call it out now. I think the second half of that answer is we have to be at the budget level. If we're just saying search is getting 30% credit, finance, like, what does that mean for them? How much are we spending in search and what are we anticipating to come? So being at that budget level and trusting the math that got us there, I think are kind of the keys to getting finance and sales to trust the approach. So reveal the curtain, reveal the math that you're using to show marketing, and then talk budgets. Don't talk, attribution credit. And I think it goes a long way to building that partnership where then together, even sales joins you and they're going to finance and say, hey, I need marketing to have a little bit more money because I trust what they're driving for pipeline.
Yeah. I love that idea of being specific with the language that you choose to use and not saying credit and saying lift and stuff. I'm a stickler for language. And so I think it's important to be very intentional in the words you choose to use to make sure that you don't get laughed out of the room by saying that this one email click was worth $100,000.
I remember back when we early on at Adobe, it was really contentious with sales, and to the point that we like itemized opportunities, and then they wanted to look through the ones we were taking credit for, and then they're like, no, we've known those guys for 5 years. No way you're taking credit for that one. I mean, that is not the relationship or the conversations anybody wants to be having. But that's where we had gotten to when we were trying to claim credit for sourcing a deal. And so that's why I think you reveal how you're calculating the lift, let them know, make sure whether it's data science, whether it's path, let them see, let them buy off, let them trust that. And then you're right, using that language, and then they start to go with you to finance to ask for the money.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we see a lot of orgs make is they get into that battle for credit with sales. And it's rare that marketing wins those, number one.
Here's another plug. Yeah, another plug for media mix modeling. You can get down to the opportunity level. The sales cannot tell you, show me, because what we're looking at is it's macro aggregated data. So we're just saying in on this day, pipeline increased by X overall. And marketing is explaining a percent of that. We don't know which deal. So you're out of that. You can't get into those fights. You just get into do we trust the model? If we trust the model, okay, now how do we fund marketing? So back to your earlier question of some of the differentiators, I kind of like that you can't get into opportunity sourcing with me. Sometimes it's good to show that story like you talked about at the beginning. So having the attribution when they want the story is really good to have, but you don't have to go there all the time.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Align BI because I want to make sure that we give you some time to talk about your organization here. So tell us a little bit more about your product, your services, and who should be thinking about potentially working with Align BI.
I appreciate the time and the opportunity to do that. I'll keep it short because people don't want to hear that too much. But we built this specifically for B2B marketing teams. Probably, revenues. I mean, we've talked about kind of your marketing spend, but 20 to million to 500 million in revenue or so. I think once you start to get really big, you have teams of data scientists that sometimes want to tackle this. We are working with a few companies that are very large that don't have data science teams that want to tackle this. So if you don't have that, we can come in bigger. But specifically B2B marketers, what we're doing with this that's unique is, and the reason it's had a slower uptake into B2B, I think, is because there's a sales team in the process. So it's not like B2C where it's like we spend money to target some consumers and they purchase and it's all pretty close together. It's like we're creating pipeline, but it takes a while for that to get created and closed. So we've built this where we're looking at the sales team as part of the model, as part of the forecast. And then something unique I think that we've done is we've kept it in your BI tool. So we actually push the results back into your Tableau or into your Power BI or Domo or Click. So you have a BI platform where you're doing analytics already. We run the model and then we'll push it into that BI platform so that other people, as many as you want to, can interact with it. So we have the code built. We use the prospect organizes the data. We can help organize it. We run it through our model, then we push it back over, and you can do all the what if scenario planning you want as you meet with your finance team. So built it on BI platforms, built it for B2B marketers, and ultimately just to make the planning process easier. I think planning for lots of big companies runs for 3 to 4 months every year. And with a good model, you can just, finance is thinking we have more, toggle up. Finance is thinking we have less, toggle down, have the forecast, have the recommendations. It just makes the whole process a lot easier.
And I think one of the key things that when we think about, who this is right for, MMM used to be not used for B2B. It was B2C only due to requirements for large data sets and lots of history and things like that. And I think that one of the things that I'm hearing from you today and some of the other conversations that we've been having is that it's a lot more accessible to B2B organizations than most B2B organizations think.
That's right. It's like we're educating people because B2B marketers haven't used them a ton. And it's a paradigm shift. We're getting out of the path. And so the B2B marketer who's lived in this path assignment world, it's a little bit of a shift to say, oh, now I'm looking at macro data instead of micro paths. So yeah, there's definitely a little bit of a switch, but it's picking up speed. And I think people are starting to understand the benefits of them a bit more. And like you say, using it together with attribution becomes a great tool set. You can get deep into the paths with your attribution and you can get high level macro with your budgets with the media mix model. I think it's a good world to get to.
Yeah, I think I use a lot of times the analogy with attribution of attribution allows you to get all the way down to, the analogy I use is forest and trees, right? Are you looking at individual trees or are you looking at a whole forest, right? And attribution allows you to look at individual trees, but it also allows you to view out and zoom out and view the entire forest. Whereas MMM allows you to zoom out and see the planet. Like it is an even bigger zoom out than what attribution allows you to do.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, I want to give everybody a chance to know you a little bit. So I like to ask a little bit of a personal question here at the end. And personally, I'm a huge music fan. I love like exploring new music. So, and I love hearing what others are listening to. So like, what music are you listening to right now? Like artists, bands, genres, like what are you into?
Depends on where if I'm in my truck, I'm listening to country music. Maybe unfortunately to some people. I lived in Nashville for a summer when I was in college, and I was like a punk guy in school. In high school, alternative punk. But Nashville converted me. I don't know, what was that, 20 years ago or so. If I'm in my garage working on stuff, I'm listening to Tom Petty. But at work, I switch between two genres while I'm working. If I don't want words, I'm either listening to the Tron soundtrack, Daft Punk. I love, like the beats without the music. When I'm like, if I'm coding or if I'm really trying to get deep, or if I'm like in a more tranquil mood, I'll put on like a River Runs Through It soundtrack, the quiet instrumental.
Okay, nice.
I'm all over the board. And if I don't mind some words in my music, I really like indie folk. I think that's the genre that you call it. Like Gregory Alan Isakov, is that how you say his last name? Hollow Cove, I think is another one, kind of this indie folk. My wife she's a photographer. She makes annual YouTube videos of our year. So she'll kind of keep track of stuff during the year, and then she brings it all together in like a 6-minute video. And so she uses these indie folk or even indie pop sometimes with some beat to it for these YouTube videos. And so I love listening to kind of that chill indie folk feel when I don't mind some words while I'm working. So as you can tell, I'm all over the board.
No, I love it. That's good stuff. I have not listened to that Tron soundtrack in a while with Daft Punk. I'm going to have to get back into that one. So appreciate you reminding me about that one.
Yeah, totally.
So before we jump out, I like to close this out at the very end with some key takeaways of what I've learned from our conversation today. One of them is that MMM has been leveraged in B2C forever, and B2B is now catching up. It can certainly help you zoom out, which helps you up-level conversations with execs. We'll talk about this a little bit more later on. It keeps you out of fights with sales because you literally cannot associate spend back to specific opportunities. So sales can't go nitpick your results because it's not opportunity specific. It'll also help you make decisions about where to invest more and invest less. Ultimately, attribution, it's incredibly difficult for attribution to be able to tell you these things. So MMM fills that gap. And not only does it tell you where to invest more and where to invest less, it'll even tell you how much to invest. A major benefit to MMM is that we can measure brand and where we can correlate spend to results. This is something that CMOs really love. I mean, there's an old joke that every CMO's first project in an organization is either to revamp the website or revamp the brand. So, CMOs love brand and being able to measure that, which brand investment is very difficult to measure with attribution. Demand gen often gets too much spend because it's so much easier to see the direct relationship, and MMM helps solve for that. And then also don't sleep on PR. Attribution, again, struggles to measure the benefits of PR. However, MMM can really help with that. Multi-touch attribution does have a lot of benefits, though. This is not to say that attribution doesn't have benefits. It does. It's really, really useful for organizations that don't have the data volume that's necessary, or that don't have the spend that's necessary for MMM to be able to be used for them. It's also really useful for campaign level detail and really, really super granular reporting. MMM doesn't do that. Multi-touch attribution does. You have to tread lightly on the influence reporting. And then lift analysis is a way that you can use multi-touch attribution and kind of get a baby step into MMM. Lift analysis is a great way to use multi-touch attribution to measure things like brand and PR that MMM is better at, and lift analysis is kind of how you take that step. You also need to be extremely specific with your language. I hate using the word credit. When we're talking about multi-touch attribution, I hate using the word cause or caused. It's very important to be specific with your language. And then ultimately, it's really important to get finance and sales to believe in the math that you're using when we're talking about budgets. Regression is like ice cream sales increasing with increasing heat, which MMM uses regression models. And then the confidence in our models and improving that confidence over time will happen with more and more data and more exposure to the models. On our next episode, we'll be talking with the founder of Recast, Michael Kaminsky. He has a really unique background in economics, and he covers some topics that neither of our guests spoke about. Specifically, we're going to cover the inaction and pain cycle and some very specific questions to ask MMM vendors if you're looking to invest one. We hope you'll take a listen. And as always, thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and review, and connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know if you'd like access to a private group where we keep these conversations going.